Okay, my name is Lawrence McGlynn, and you're listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor here on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, streaming Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHM WPPM. So on the program, Lance Haver will report on ACA subsidies and provide an update on SEPTA. Vanessa Maria Graber will share her experiences at the No Kings protest, and Denise Clay Murray will provide insight on the upcoming election. Denise, how are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. There's a lot going on. The election, I feel like, has snuck up on me, even though I've been paying very close attention to it. I can't believe it's the middle of October already, or getting closer to the end, actually.
Yeah, it's kind of snuck up on everybody, to be
Yeah.
honest. A lot of folks are just now realizing that Monday was the last day that you could register to vote in the state of Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
And I get the feeling that a lot of people didn't know that, and they'll go to the polls on November 4th and say, "Well, why can't I vote?" Oh, because you haven't registered. That's if people go to the polls at all, because let's face it, this has traditionally been one of those elections where nobody shows up.
Right. Right. Usually, as you get closer to presidential elections, the numbers increase. And
Mhm.
right after a presidential, and this is technically the second election after the presidential, the primary was the first, you don't see a high turnout. But hopefully this year it'll be a little different. So we're going to talk more about that later in the show. First, we'd like to bring on consumer reporter Lance Haver to talk. Well, actually, this first thing we're going to talk about, Lance, is not in your role as a consumer reporter, but your role as a private citizen. Tell us a little bit about where we are with the SEPTA situation.
Well, thank you. First, good evening, Denise. After spending a fair amount of my time in City Council, I am in awe of the both of you. It is hard for me to believe that you are there from the beginning to the end. I can't imagine how much coffee you have to drink between all the presentations and all the backslapping and all of the words. But that being said, this past week, City Council met and held a hearing on what's happening with the SEPTA trains. What they were interested in is, would SEPTA actually be able to inspect the trains on time, or what would the federal government do if SEPTA missed the deadline? And no surprise, SEPTA said they've got everything under control and they'll be all set. But I thought the most interesting part of the hearing was one who wasn't there, and that was the Transport Workers Union 234, which is the local that represents the bus operators, the subway operators, all of the SEPTA workers inside the city of Philadelphia, not the rail riders, not anyone else. But there was no one there from any union to say what SEPTA management was saying was correct. So I thought that was really interesting. And I thought it was interesting that none of the city council people said, "Hey, where's your union? How come the guys who work for you, who are fixing the trains, who are doing the actual work, aren't here with you saying, yeah, we'll get it done on time?" No city council person asked that. But I thought the most important question wasn't asked, and that was after the SEPTA's general manager, Sauer, said there's a federal program for which SEPTA qualifies that would lend SEPTA the money at a reduced interest rate to buy new trains. And not a single city council person said, well, if that's the case, why aren't you buying new train cars? Why are you letting them catch on fire? And why didn't you do this before? And how long has this program been in effect? And why did you buy a new key car system for over $200 million when you're telling us now that the train cars have reached the end of their lifetimes? So we didn't really need new key cards. I'm sure they'll be better. I'm sure it'll be easier to use, and I'm sure everyone will enjoy them. But I think that given the choice between new and better key cards or cars that don't catch on fire for the trains, I think most people would have said, well, I'd rather use the old key card, as clutchy, as cumbersome as it is, rather than sit on the train that catches on fire. Denise, I know you ride the train on a regular basis, so let me ask you directly, which would you prefer? A new key card system or a train that actually shows up on time, doesn't catch on fire, and gets you where you want to go?
Well, I'd rather have the train that doesn't catch on fire, gets me where I need to go, and comes, at a time that will benefit me and my fellow riders in terms of getting there.
Yeah, I think that the train's not catching on fire is a good prerequisite
Mhm.
for what should be happening at SEPTA.
Does seem like a relatively low bar, right? It's like
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
the other thing is, now this was more of a curiosity rather than a horror story. SEPTA, Mitch Channon, who's been active for many years in many different progressive organizations, was right there from 215, and he lives in the Northeast. And he rides the train. He told the story that if he takes the train to work, it takes him about half an hour. If he takes the bus to the L to the work, it takes him about an hour and a half. So it's a big difference. He says the problem is he can't tell whether the train's coming or not. And that just seemed unbelievable. I mean, people my age, when you go to the Apple store, they try and sell you the Apple AirTags so you can always find your keys and your glasses and your wallets. And I'm just thinking, well, why does this have to go out and buy a bunch of Apple AirTags? I can even buy one for my bicycle. So if my bicycle is stolen, I can find it and go and steal it back. Now, I'm not going to do that personally, but you read these stories of people who hide the Apple AirTag on their bicycle. Someone steals it, they track it from some other part of the city, hop over the other person's backyard and take their bike back. So I'm just curious, maybe someone with the SEPTA board is meeting tomorrow, Thursday at 3:00. I'm hoping someone will bring them there and lend them a few of the Apple Air cards. Or maybe there's another brand. Maybe Google makes something similar, or some other company makes something similar. But, they have 200 trains, 200 AirTags, should be fairly easy. Again, if you can find my keys, can find my bicycle, it should be able to find the SEPTA train without too much difficulty.
It doesn't seem complicated.
It's just, no one asked. And that's what's really amazing. It's almost like we just accept how bad it is and we go from there.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of how bad it is, I'm going to go from reporting on what happened at the SEPTA hearings to talking about what will be happening in the Affordable Care Act. And if we could just call up the slides for a second. So the projections are that the Affordable Care Act, the ACA marketplace premium payment, would more than double on average next year, meaning this coming year, if the enhanced premium tax credits expire. Now, I want to start out by talking about who is the Affordable Care Act for. And it's for people who don't get health insurance through work. So it's for people like me, like Denise, like Larry, people who want to be entrepreneurs, who want to do something that's a little different, or work for small companies that the company doesn't offer health insurance, or older workers who are not yet able to get Social Security because they're not 65, Social Security or Medicaid because they're not yet 65 and don't qualify for those programs. So they're stuck. They get downsized at work because sometimes of their age, even though that's supposed to be illegal, and they can't get insurance anyplace other than the Affordable Care Act. And the enhanced premiums have been what's helping people afford health insurance. And what we know is that without the enhanced benefits, the enhanced subsidies, there's going to be very large rate increases. And I've put this map up just so I can show exactly where President Trump got his biggest votes. And all the red areas is where the president won easily. These are all county maps. And here's what's truly amazing. When you look at this and you look at where the premium increases are going to be, it becomes amazing. The places where President Trump won are the places that have the highest increase in the Affordable Care Act. I'm going to go back. If you look, these are the counties, Juniata and down here. You look at them and you see those are areas that Trump won handily. And here's areas where people are looking at a 400 to 500% increase. Now, I believe these projected increases are too low. And here's why. These are the projected increases based solely, only on what people will have to pay if they lose the subsidy. They don't include the increase that the insurance companies are going to ask for higher premiums. when fewer people buy insurance, that means there are fewer people paying in, and it means that the insurance premiums are going to go up. So even though these are astronomical rate increases, I project that they're actually going to be higher than what the state of Pennsylvania is telling us now. They're saying it's 82%. I believe it's going to be over 100% on average. And the increase is going to fall on most heavily on workers between the ages of 55 and 65. And if you think about it for more than a second, this makes perfect sense. For most of us, it's not true for everyone, but for most of us, when you're younger, you don't need as much in the way of medical services as you do when you're older. So the older you get, the more you tend to use the system. The way insurance is supposed to work is you pay in for all those years when you're young and you're healthy, and maybe you go for a checkup, maybe you get a strep throat, you need some penicillin, but maybe even break a finger or a leg, but you don't have the chronic illnesses that come along with aging. The people who are forced out of work because the factory shut down, the store shut down, or they were just forced out because the business didn't want to pay an older worker anymore, they don't qualify for Medicare yet. They're not 65. They make too much to get Medicaid, so they have to pay. And with the increased subsidies, the amount they paid was capped at 8.5% of their income. So this is just an example. Married couple, 2 workers, making around $82,000 a year, which really, unfortunately, isn't that much for 2 workers. We're talking about $41,000 a year each. I'd like to say that's a lot of money, but unfortunately, it's really not anymore. It's really, it's close to the edge. Right now, they're capped at 8.5% of their income for their health insurance, or $581 a month. Seems like a lot, but if the enhanced premiums disappear, which is what President Trump and the Republicans in Congress want to do, that protection goes away. And the premiums will jump to $2,934 a month, 43% of their monthly income. It will result in a 405% increase in the couple's cost of health insurance, their premium. I'm going to say it again because it's so overwhelming. The people that President Trump is harming the most, the Republicans are harming the most, are the areas of the state which voted for him and older voters who tended to vote for him. When you're young, you may not buy health insurance. And we are projecting right now that the majority of people who will drop their health insurance are people who are not currently under a doctor's care. But this 60-year-old couple who may have high blood pressure, who may have high cholesterol, who may have ongoing health problems, they're not going to risk it. They're going to continue to pay. And because they use the medical system, their premiums are going to go up. While there are some protections in the law against discrimination, there is no protection against age discrimination when it comes to health insurance. So some of these people are going to see 43% of their income go to health insurance. And none of this is really a surprise. The organization, the state agency that runs the Affordable Care Act marketplace, which is what sells the premiums, tells the people the price, gives them the choice, is called Penny. And Penny is anticipating 150,000 people will lose their coverage. They just won't be able to afford it when these enhanced benefits, enhanced subsidies disappear. And so what we're looking at is really a catastrophe. And it's not just the people who are on the Affordable Care Act who are going to lose out. What's going to happen is the hospitals are going to raise the prices of the people who can pay. And if you don't have health insurance, you're still going to be treated for an emergency service, but you're not going to be able to pay. Now, the American Bankruptcy Institute, which is an organization of bankruptcy attorneys. I mean, this is not a progressive organization. It's an organization of people who make their living filing bankruptcies and going through the bankruptcy proceedings. This comes directly from them. Healthcare costs, #1 cause of bankruptcy for American families. It's almost unheard of in the rest of the, I would say, civilized world, cultural world, first world. There has to be some language to explain this, where if you get sick, you become bankrupt. It's acceptable. It's only here in the United States where we say, look, if you're unfortunate enough to be ill, if you're unfortunate enough to fall down and like get a concussion and have long-term healthcare needs, you're going to go bankrupt. So for a large extent, even people who have health insurance are going to have these costs. But now when we're talking about eliminating health insurance, we're talking about an increase in the number of bankruptcies. What that means, of course, is the hospitals and the doctors don't get paid. There is no free lunch here, and people have to understand that. We tend to say, well, maybe it won't affect us. I don't get my insurance from the ACA. But when that hospital treats someone and they cannot collect money because the person doesn't have it, because they filed bankruptcy, because there's no money to give them, what is the hospital going to turn around and do? And what they're going to do is try and charge people who can pay. So Dr. Arkush, who's a medical doctor who's in charge of health and human services in the state of Pennsylvania, says that when hospitals begin to see patients who don't have health insurance, they will have no choice but to shift the cost of care they provide to people who do have health insurance who can pay. What it means, of course, is that there'll be higher insurance premiums. I know that insurance companies advertise that they're good neighbors. I'm not going to repeat their ads, but they try and tell us how much they care about us. They're good neighbors. They treat us well. But the truth is that almost every insurance company is in business to make money. And I'm not going to say there's anything wrong with people organizing a business to make money. I'm just going to say I want to acknowledge that. That is what they are in business to do. They're not in business to be my good neighbor. They're not in business to have good hands. They're not in business to take care of me. They are organized to make money. So if they go and they're insuring people and there's not enough money to pay, what they're going to do is simply raise rates. And they're going to continue to raise rates. And even if you get your insurance through work, your employer is going to have to negotiate with Independence Blue Cross, and I know Independence Blue Cross got a big award from the city of Philadelphia. I know we said, again, that's part of the reason why better you be in city council than me, because I couldn't believe that we were giving an award to this company that used to be a nonprofit, but now only 5% of what's called their book of business, the policies they sell, are nonprofits. 95% of what they do is for profit. And they've organized themselves to actually make a fortune on the insurance they sell to low-income workers. It's kind of crazy. Here we are saying as a city, we're really concerned about poor people, really concerned about poor people of color. And here's a company that's making their profits off of the backs of those people, selling them health insurance, which they don't have any choice but to buy. And we've just given them an award and told everyone how wonderful they are. I
have a Blue Cross Blue Shield story.
Let's hear.
Now that you've brought that up, in the early days of the ACA, before the ACA was passed, I was new to freelancing and I was trying to find a health insurance company, so I could get health insurance, because being a diabetic without health insurance is really, really expensive. And I'm calling around, and one of the places I called was Independence Blue Cross to talk to them about possibly buying health insurance. And I told them, what I needed, what I wanted, all of that in terms of health insurance. And everything was okay. They were about to sell me a policy until I told them I was a diabetic. Then they said, we can't help you. And they hung up on me. So I get the feeling that is about to become the story for a lot of people if this tax credit goes away.
And I think you're absolutely right. And one of the unfortunate things is there are lots of problems with the Affordable Care Act. There really are. But ending it all at once will not solve any of those problems. We cannot solve the problems for healthcare delivery by deciding to price people out of the market and do nothing else and say, well, it's solved now. They are complex issues. I mean, I, as somebody who follows health insurance, had to laugh when And I know I shouldn't, but I had to laugh when President Trump kept talking about his plan, his plan, his plan. And then when he was pressed on why he hasn't introduced his plan, he said, no one knew health insurance was a complicated issue. I, I you know, everybody knows these are difficult things. It's very difficult to figure out how do we reward people for staying healthy? How do we create those incentives? How do we make sure that when insurance companies pay doctors and hospitals whatever they want, that doesn't end up costing us all more? These are complicated issues, and they require more than an overnight solution. And eliminating these subsidies is an overnight solution, and it will break the system, and it will break the backs of the people who are really struggling. I want to just again highlight what's happening to the areas that voted for President Trump. And this is in the congressional 9th district. This is one of his strongest supporters. Now, the bottom number shows you how important the additional subsidies were. In 2021, when the subsidies were increased, there were 17,896 people who are getting their health insurance through the Affordable Care Act. This year, it's 26,218. 47% more are getting it. This year, it is the highest number of people in the state of Pennsylvania who have ever had health insurance. Now, I know some people think that's a bad thing, but I think those people deserve to be put in a special room. Having health insurance and having access to health care is a good thing. It's not bad that people have health insurance. Because they're going to do away with the subsidies, this area that voted for President Trump, that has a congressman that is one of the congressmen who tried to overturn the election when Biden defeated President Trump by outright lying, his constituents, these 26,000 people, are going to see an 82% increase on average. Again, it's going to be worse for the older folks, but 82% on average. And that's just without the subsidies. That's not including the additional amount that the insurance companies are going to get when they raise the premiums. It's not just that district, the 10th district, which is in the northeast, in central Pennsylvania. Again, the same story, 15,000 to 28,000. The increase will be 82%. 13th district, south central Pennsylvania, again, same story. 16,000 before the enhanced, 27,000 after the enhanced. When they do away with the enhanced subsidies, it'll be an 82% increase. These are all Republican areas with Republican congressmen. The congressmen are voting or refusing to vote to help out their own constituent, and they're watching their own constituents have these incredible increases. And again, I recognize that it's hard to comprehend all the different moving parts for health insurance. I agree it is a complicated issue. Becker's Hospital Review is the institutional group that reports on hospitals. These are supported by hospitals. This is not an organization that I'm allowed to join. I can't write for them. I can't be interviewed by them. This is simply an organization that speaks on behalf of the hospitals and looks at the world from the hospital's point of view. So they say hospital closures, layoffs strain Pennsylvania's healthcare landscape. Rural hospitals are the ones that are going to suffer. Again, places that voted for Trump. Pennsylvania is ranked third in the nation in the number of residents who live in federally designated rural areas. Approximately a quarter of Pennsylvania population, 3.4 million people, live in rural areas. Right now, as I'm talking, there are 10 counties that have no hospitals in their jurisdictions. And this comes from Becker's Healthcare Review podcast. Pennsylvania has the unfortunate distinction of having one of the highest percentages of rural hospital closures. Nicole Stallings, president and CEO of the Hospital Association of Pennsylvania, said during an episode on their podcast. In the northwest part of the state, now that's a little bit east of Erie, in the northwest part of the state, there is now an area the size of Connecticut without a birthing hospital. I'm going to say it again, an area the size of Connecticut, inside of Pennsylvania, in the northwest part of the state where they voted for Trump overwhelmingly, has no hospital for women to give birth in. It's not going to get any better if the hospitals lose Medicare patients, lose Medicaid patients. It's not going to get any better if people drop their health insurance. It's only going to get worse. And while I know people don't like to think of these issues as intertwined, but they are. If we eliminate SNAP, people are not going to just move, and they're not going to voluntarily die for us. They will eat worse food, and they will get sicker. And you can blame people all you want, but at the end of the day, if people don't have enough money, if that older couple, that 60-year-old couple, sees a 405% increase in their healthcare premiums, they've got to find the money from somewhere. And it's, we know that part of it's going to come out if you no longer eat the good food. You don't eat the grass-fed beef. You don't eat the organic chicken. You don't eat the good eggs. You eat the food that you can afford. And unfortunately, you have, again, whatever you think of Secretary Kennedy, you have Secretary Kennedy saying, if you eat bad food, you get sick. And yet you have his president, the person who appointed him, saying, well, we're going to cut SNAP and we're going to cut health care insurance. And we know, according to Secretary Kennedy, these people are going to get sick, and they're going to get sicker, and that's going to bring down the quality of health care throughout the state. And it really is time to recognize that and ask the question, what will it take? What will it take for people who voted for President Trump to look at the reality and see what he's doing to his own constituents?
Well, and we're still no closer to any resolution here.
I am hoping that the state of Pennsylvania will become the backstop for SNAP. SNAP is the old food stamp program. President Trump's folks have announced that they're going to run out of money and they don't intend to continue to fund it, even though the vote hasn't happened to defund it. He says because of the budget impasse and because he wants to teach, quote unquote, the Democrats a lesson, he's going to not fund SNAP. But it's not the Democrats who are going to suffer. It's his constituents. Most of the people who get SNAP in the state of Pennsylvania live in rural areas.
Yeah.
Those are the people who will suffer. And, I'm waiting for Secretary Kennedy to say something.
Yep. All right. Well, Lance, thank you for that report. We're going to stay on top of this. Hopefully we'll have better news next week. But I'm not optimistic about the shutdown ending anytime soon.
Yeah, they just sent the House bill to the Senate for the 12th time, and the Senate has voted it down for the 12th time.
There you go.
Thank you for the time. And again, I'm in awe that you can watch City Council all that hours without going, wait, aren't you going to ask the important question? Oh, wait, no, you're not. Wait,
Yeah.
How can, I feel like I should bring a poster board and write, like in the TV shows where they hold up signs that say applause, I should hold up a sign that say, ask this question.
Yeah.
Thank you again.
All right. Thanks, Lance. And now we'd like to bring on Vanessa Maria Graber to tell us a little bit about the protest she attended this weekend. Vanessa, how are you? No?
Hey, I'm great. Thanks
Good.
for having me on. Before we talk about the protests, I just want to tell people that other things that are impacted by all this is LIHEAP. LIHEAP is going to be accepting applications and still doing approvals. However, the funds are frozen. So I see Denise has her fall sweater on. It's starting to get cold.
Yes.
And I think it's really hard for people to pay for those utility costs. And there is a lot of concern around food stamps as well, getting cut off. And so I think, we will continue to pay attention to how all these programs and services are going to impact Philadelphians and Pennsylvanians. But I'm with Lance. I'm not sure when that shutdown is going to end. And as someone whose passport expires at the end of the month, I'm not, and I have to fly out that first week of November. I have no hope that I'll be able to get a passport between now and then. So I hope we're wrong though, right?
Well, we'll see. But
I was talking to a friend of mine who works for the federal government. I was in DC last week for the Society of Professional Journalists Media Fest, and I talked to a friend of mine that works in the intelligence community, and he was telling me, apply for your passport or reapply for your passport anyway, because if you don't, it could be like when COVID happened and you suddenly had this like influx of people who needed passports. Because Chris and I are thinking about going to a wedding we've been invited to in Namibia in March. So we're trying to get all of that paperwork together.
That's good advice. I went and got my real ID today instead, in order to be able to fly out. And yeah, unfortunately, the last day to register to vote was on Monday in Pennsylvania. But they still asked me if I'm already registered. But for folks who are getting those driver's license and IDs, even though they'll still let you register, it is now too late to register for this current election if you weren't already. Now, if you were already registered but under a different address, they're just telling people to go back to their old polling place if they are able to get to it. So now we can talk about the No Kings protests. More than 7 million people across the United States took to the streets in more than 2,000 protests opposing the policies of President Trump. And of course, I covered the one that was in Philadelphia. And I worked together with the Pacifica Radio Network. Of course, WPPM is an affiliate of that Pacifica Radio Network. And they did an all-day national broadcast. So I was part of the first block of reports from the East Coast. And I was able to call in and do 2 different reports from the ground. The first one I did from City Hall, where people were gathered, where the march started. And then the second one I did at Independence Mall, where there was a stage and a variety of different speakers assembled to talk to the crowd of more than 10,000 people. It's hard to say how many people were actually there because so many people were joining every step of the march. And then when I was at Independence Mall, there were so many people there. I was not able to get inside the crowd to see how far it went back. But it's sufficient to say that it was a pretty good turnout, even though it was much smaller than the No Kings march that happened in June, where Philadelphia, had the flagship march because they weren't able to do one in Washington because of the president's military/birthday parade. This time they were able to have a rally and march in Washington where more than 200,000 people came. And so I made a little video and I'd love to show it. And then you can ask questions and we can talk more. Yeah, so here is video of some of the signs. Of course, they were very clever, being that it was Philadelphia. There were a lot of people in costume, and you'll see lots of people in inflatables. People brought puppets. Of course, there's Philly Elmo, who seems to always make an appearance. That is actually a crocheted sign. It says "Go Birds" and "F Ice." And lots of different issues being represented. A lot of signs about water ice, and many other issues. A lot of signs referring to not wanting to have kings and our colonial history of 1776. A lot of signs about democracy, free speech, First Amendment rights, and democracy being threat. There were a lot of frogs. That is a throwback to the inflatable frog at Portland and the Portland protests. And people were also, advocating for reproductive rights, LGBT rights, immigrant rights, a lot of different concerns represented. There's, many people advocating an end to the genocide in Palestine. And so the mood was pretty jovial, lots of people there. I think that's the end. People were in pretty good spirits considering. Now, there's been a lot of criticism of these marches because Indivisible and the 5501 campaign, 5051 campaign, already organized or haven't done much to organize people locally. And even between the last No Kings March in June and this one in October, I haven't seen much organizing or how that translates to the local chapters. There's also not a list of demands. Of course, they were encouraging people to vote, registering people to vote. There was a lot of local organizers and organizations from Philly represented. People were using it as a place to recruit people, give out flyers. I actually collected a couple zines. Philly has a very great zine culture. We even have a zine festival. So I was pretty happy to get those educational materials. Folks were definitely getting signed up to do things. But with the crowd being so diverse in the ways that they're advocating for many different issues and no real demands being presented, there is a legitimate critique of how effective these protests are. Now, I talked to one family who had their children with them, and they said, we actually go to a lot of protests in Philly. And sometimes, it's scary because there's a lot of police and they can become violent. People get arrested. And they said this was the only protest that they felt comfortable bringing their children. They felt it was important to bring their children to see people using their First Amendment rights and resisting these policies. I saw quite a few disabled people there and a lot of older people, which again speaks to these protests being more accessible than maybe some other protests. And the fact that it was on a Saturday, some people say, well, everything's closed on a Saturday. You're not really disrupting anything. While others say, they're really not able to make it to protest during the week when they're at work or even after work. A lot of people have kids in school that they have to pick up and do homework with afterwards. So having it on a Saturday makes it ideal. And so, yeah, there's just a lot of criticism. Of course, President Trump dismissed the protests. He said they were small and ineffective. They definitely were not small. Whether or not they're effective, that is up for debate. But I think, again, it's worth repeating, this was the largest protest in U.S. history. More than 7 million people came out to protest the current president's policies. And I think that in itself is pretty significant and worth covering, at least on our show and for the Pacifica Radio Network.
Now, Vanessa, where do you see this movement going? You had mentioned that there isn't a lot of organizing around it. What do you think people should be doing and what would be useful?
I post a lot of information on my social media about what people can be doing. I think it's important to educate yourself. That's why we have this show, right? We're always giving people information. I thought the information that Lance just presented was very, very informative, especially the maps, right? Like showing all the different people being impacted by these policies and the rates at which they're going up. So informing yourself is really important. Gil Scott-Heron, when he wrote that song, "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised," was referring to a revolution of the mind. A lot of people don't know that. And he said the revolution has to first take place in your mind and you have to educate yourself. So that's always where I encourage people to start. And then secondly, there are so many organizations here in Philadelphia and the surrounding area where people can get involved in. People can volunteer. Of course, Election Day, there's always a lot of help needed on Election Day. There's lots of campaigns people can join. But even on a more basic level, these food pantries and food banks are going to be really, really busy in the next month or so. People can, volunteer there. There's other political organizations that people can join outside of Indivisible and 55-1 that do have more concrete demands, and especially all the issue-based ones, especially around environmental justice, reproductive rights, immigrant rights. For people that don't have time to do that, you can always donate, right? Like sending money is another way you can support these movements. I think it's always important for elected officials to hear from you. whether or not you voted for them doesn't really matter. If they're in your district and they're supposed to represent you, especially during this shutdown, right? I think it's worth people talking to their federal representatives, right? Both their senators and their U.S. Congress people, to let them know how they feel about the shutdown and all of these budget cuts. And I think lastly, just getting involved with your neighbors. I recently moved and I was really surprised. All my neighbors, have introduced themselves to me. They have some sort of email list, or like they're organizing themselves. They've talked to me about all sorts of events and things happening in the neighborhood. And I just love that about Philly. I love that there's an East Kensington association that I can get involved with. Even the dog park has an email list and a group of people organizing around that. And so, even hyper local, being a block captain, getting involved with your neighborhood, and some of these registered community organizations and CDCs is another way that people can get involved. And so, the saying goes, you've probably seen this on the bumper sticker, think globally, but act locally. But it's so true. The biggest change that you can make is within your own neighborhood and your own community. And if all else fails, you can show up on Thursday at City Council for public comment. You will always be welcome there.
Denise's favorite part of the show on Thursdays.
Whether we like it or not.
Let me
Yeah,
bring
and that
back
is where you can really exercise your free speech, for the most part. And so people have, a gripe about any of these issues, or they want to support legislation. That's a really great place for people to start. You really don't need any training or anything, although it's helpful if you write your thoughts down and practice it before you do it. But that's one thing that, is democracy in action. You can go down to your local township, if you don't live in Philly, if you live in the surrounding area, and sign up for a public comment. And you can attend a lot of the meetings that you all attend. You see community members there as well. So you can go to the SEPTA hearings. You can go to the utility commission hearings. You can go to the school board meetings and see Lisa Haver there. So that's another way people can take action. And I think, as we're gearing up for this election and these judge races, a lot of people don't do their homework when it comes to judges. So you have 2 weeks to start learning who the judicial candidates are and making a list. There's voter guides if you don't want to do all that work, and you can sort through them. But if you're registered to vote,
we're going to talk about that next week on the show too.
Yeah, it's important to get out there on election day and to know who the candidates are and the ballot initiatives and all of that. And so that's another way people can make change. All of it together is needed. And so there's many different ways people can participate. And when in doubt, just make art, because we also need our artists and musicians to get us through these tough times.
All right, let me bring back in Lance Haver here. We're going to talk a little bit about, well, go ahead and ask your question, Lance.
Well, so I wanted to ask Vanessa, the little I heard from the speakers, they were all Democratic congressmen, and they were all supporters of Israel. And I was wondering if any one of them, if any of the speakers you heard were people who were willing to be critical of the genocide that was happening in Palestine.
So I'll say a couple of things. That's a really important issue that you brought up. At the No Kings rally in June, there was a congresswoman, her name escapes me, from Georgia, who's Palestinian, who spoke about the genocide in Palestine and our U.S. tax dollars being used to support Israel. And so there was that messaging that happened in June with that congressperson. This time around, it wasn't just Congress people. I mean, we did have DA Larry Krasner speak. We had Mike Lee, who is the director of the Pennsylvania ACLU. Now, the criticism this time around comes, and this is, allegedly members of, Palestinian coalition here in Philadelphia requested that the Palestinian speaker be allowed to take the stage with the other speakers. And like I said, allegedly, they were denied. That's what they're claiming on social media. They've issued different statements saying that they were disappointed. One of the other things that sparked some controversy in the crowd as I was doing some reporting is on the stage, there was an Israeli flag like right in front of the stage, and there's a camera there that's showing the visuals from the stage all the way in the back where I was to these big jumbotrons, and you could see on the jumbotron a person with a Palestinian flag fighting with the person holding the Israeli flag, and they were going back and forth. And so people started screaming and being upset at that, and they were calling for the Israeli flag to be removed. I don't know what that was all about. I was in the back with the crowd. I really couldn't tell you what was happening at the beginning, but there were a lot of people there in response to not having a Palestinian speaker at the protest in Philadelphia. A contingent of people held kind of like a, I don't want to say counter protest, but they certainly infiltrated the protest and came with lots of signs and flags. Now, they did that last time as well. And being as though there were so many other issues, I hardly noticed. I only read that they intentionally did that after the fact. But I do think, at least in this city, because there's such a large Palestinian and Muslim community, people were wanting to feel represented, and especially since there was a recent ceasefire and there's been criticisms that the ceasefire has been violated. And again, I think this remains to be a top issue, especially for young people. And also, I'd like to also note that yesterday, student activist from Colombia, Mahmoud Khalil, was in Philadelphia at the federal court, at the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, so the judges could hear his case and his pending deportation by the Trump administration. And there was a large crowd of people that assembled to greet him there. And I saw video and photographs from that, and he was very glad to see that Philadelphians came out in support of him. And so again, being that we're in Philadelphia, I think we have to acknowledge that there has been a lot of protests, a lot of demonstrations in support of this issue, and also with the campus protests at Penn and Temple and Drexel, a lot of suppression of free speech of our student activists.
Right. All right. Well, Vanessa, thank you so much for that. And Lance, thank you again. And now, Denise, we got two things we can do, one or the other, or both.
Yeah.
Tomorrow is Thursday.
Yes.
Which is our favorite day of the week, because that's City Council.
Yes.
And Lance's least favorite. But our favorite, we love it. And tomorrow, but it's also important to talk a little bit about the upcoming election.
Yes.
And this was something that you had addressed in your column on Monday in the Hall Monitor newsletter. Why don't we start there? Tell us a little bit about what you wrote about, and what's really important here.
What I wrote about is the fact that, you said earlier, this election kind of snuck up on you. It snuck up on a lot of people. And Monday was the last day to register to vote. And what happens is you have what I call these criminal justice elections, where we're electing judges and the district attorney and stuff. And we're not, and people don't pay attention to those elections. So they ended up being low turnout elections. Now, in the case of this year, the judges in particular on a statewide level, everyone really, really needs to pay attention to, because right now, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, which is the big race that everybody's watching, because there are 3 seats up for either retention or denial of retention. Those seats right now, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court is 5-2 Democrat heavy, which means there are more Democrats than Republicans on the judiciary. in the Supreme Court. Now, why is that important? Because there's going to be a couple of things coming up, mostly things that have to do with elections, things that have to do with civil rights, things that have to do with voting rights that are going to be coming up in the not too distant future. And if you've been looking at courts around the country, the more Republican controlled courts have been approving things like gerrymandered districts that have no connection to a census, which is when you're supposed to redistrict that when you have a census, and other laws that basically have, taken rights away from people of color, from people who are LGBTQ, especially trans people, and other things. So you kind of need to pay attention to the courts, because who you put on the court could directly connect to whether or not your right to vote looks the same in Pennsylvania as it did before.
And the Republican playbook has been attack the most vulnerable communities, trans people. It's a small group of people, but let's dehumanize them, because people who have never met a trans person, that's what they want to see. It's sickening. It's sickening. But that's what we're talking about here.
Right. Now, another race that everybody needs to watch, and is very, very local, is the district attorney's race.
Yeah.
A young woman named Kada Smith was killed by a person who, as it turns out, is has a cop as a relative, and B, was charged with something similar, but the judge that oversaw the case, even though the district attorney asked for $1 million bail, cut the bail down to $200,000. He got his 10%, which was $20,000. He went out, he got out of jail, and he allegedly killed Kada Smith. Now,
Kada Scott.
Mm-hmm. Now you have people who are blaming Larry Krasner for this. Now, does Larry blame himself a little bit? Yeah, he admitted as much in a press conference he had. But before you take that as gospel, what everyone needs to realize is that the district attorney can ask for a multi-million-dollar bail for anything, like a murder or something. If the judge decides not to give it, or if the judge decides that this person should have a lesser bail, then the judge is going to overrule that. But the big race is between, Krasner and his Democratic primary opponent, former Judge Dugan. And his first name just went right out of my head, and I feel bad about that. But they're running against each other. So far, there have been no plans for debates. The last time these two men debated was when they were running in the primary, and I covered one of those debates, and basically found it to be more of a name-calling contest than it was, anything that had anything to do with what either of these men would actually do as district attorney. But that's that's another big race that everyone needs to watch. But again, like I said, these races tend to be, really under attended. The last DA's race, I believe we had like a 19% turnout. And
that might be optimistic.
And that might have been high.
Yeah.
But it's kind of ridiculous that, that's where we are, where 19% of, the people who live in the city with over 1 million people in it bothered to vote.
Yeah.
And, that's, you get what you pay for in most things. And you get what you pay for in elections. You look at the fact that Donald Trump is president. If maybe another 100,000 people came out to vote in Pennsylvania, that probably would not have happened.
Right.
But, you get what you pay for. Now you have a bunch of people who are, really afraid that they're going to lose their health care and they're going to lose their SNAP benefits. In fact, most of the folks that are going to be going to the polls that are from low-income communities may be doing so on empty stomachs, because in November, they're not going to have their SNAP benefits. That's already been announced.
Right. So Denise, let's shift gears a little bit here. I want to give a preview of something and just get your opinion on it.
Okay.
Next Monday, there's going to be a committee hearing in City Council about the possibility of repealing the soda tax. It's kind of an interesting idea. This is at the behest of Councilmember Jimmy Harity.
I'm not surprised.
This is something he's interested in. What do you think about this idea?
Well, here's the thing. If the soda tax would have been done the way it was supposed to be done, and what we're seeing here is the power of the soda lobby.
Yeah.
The distributors are the people who are supposed to pay this tax, not the store owners, not any of those people. It's not supposed to be passed on to the consumer at all. The only people who are supposed to pay that tax is the distributors. And the distributors have been working really, really hard to get this tax repealed. Now, what I would like to know, because this tax is specific to a particular program, the rebuild program. And I want to know where you're going to get the money that comes to rebuild from the soda tax. If it's not from the soda tax, where is this money going to come from? And no one has ever answered that question.
Yeah, so I think we're talking about $60 million or so.
Right, and no one has ever answered, where are you going to get this $60 million? What people fail to realize when there are taxes implemented in the city or anywhere else is that once that tax is implemented, it is really, really hard to get rid of, because the money that is brought in by that tax is not easily replaceable. And unfortunately, folks, like I said, I understand where, Councilmember Harity is coming from. He's a union guy. There are union people complaining about this, but even the union people need to understand that they're complaining about something that's not supposed to be affecting them anyway.
Yeah, and it's one of those strange things too, where now and back when the soda tax was passed, the different constituencies who were opposed to it and for it were kind of across the map. It wasn't like a partisan issue, it seemed to me. It was a lot of different groups who maybe you wouldn't expect them to be for or against, but they were. It was an interesting kind of concept. Now, I'll just throw this out there because we are running out of time. One of the things I've heard from people who would like to see the tax repealed is they would like that $60 million or so to come directly from the general fund. Keep the rebuild program, but move that money just as a liability in the general fund, which it's not impossible. But it's also not ideal, because when we talk about budget, we realize
you're going to have to cut that. Right, you're going to have to cut that money from something else.
Yes.
And where are you going to cut it from? You're not going to take it out of the police budget. We have already seen your no willingness to do that.
Right.
And if you try to take it out of like healthcare or some other part of the budget, that's a non-starter. So where does this $60 million come from?
Yeah, and now might not be the time to start doing away with taxes, So we have to leave it there. Next week on the show, big election preview show. Got a lot to talk about, especially with those judicial races. We're going to highlight that. So we'll see you next week on Hall Monitor.